Esports has some great hosts. OJ Borg is sweeter than Sunny D, and resistance to his charisma is futile. Machine is unrelenting in his curiosity about the game and lubricated by a passion for hype moments. Smix is cute as a button and does more homework than anyone else among the hosts to bring you guys the facts and figures from which players can give interesting answers. And you know what? Esportspools hosts some of the best fantasy contests and bets in the entire community. Thorin vs Reddit, episode 12, CSGO, as you may expect. Some classic shit going to be coming up here, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently for this one, and this is going to be an experiment. It didn't take as long as I thought, so I might try this for future ones, but I know some people get frustrated that I don't show the comment on the screen. I just read out the comment myself, and you have to remember what I said when I'm then replying to it. So instead, I'm going to actually show the comments on screen. It's just that it wasn't as simple as just screenshotting them, because actually part of the reason I didn't do that to begin the series is that then Reddit mods actually can capriciously decide that you're somehow doxing that user or manipulating, well, I guess not doxing directly, they'd call it something like brigading the person by suggesting people go back and downvote them, which actually wouldn't work for once in a month, so, but whatever. So what I've done is I've took a screenshot, but I've deleted the person's name, and I've actually taken out their team flare just to make it more reasonable as well. And let's address it as if we didn't know their team flare, even though some of them are ludicrous when you see the fucking team flare. So I'm going to bring up each one of them on screen, which actually also I might edit a couple of seconds out as I'm bringing them up. So you're going to get to see all of them as I do it. So this comment was in a thread where Magus commented on the new major changes, which are that the teams who win the minors, they don't go to a major qualifier anymore. The major qualifier is basically the first week or so of the major. So they're actually, after the minor, directly into the major. And Magus's point on Twitter was that this is somewhat unfair for really good teams like NIP, Heroic. I mean, they're not really good, but, you know, good teams like Heroic, NIP, etc., who, if they were in a minor like the Asia minor, would almost certainly make it through, but can't even make it to the EU minor because of how competitive Europe is, and they're having to play in online qualifiers in Europe and don't even make it to the minor. So yes, I actually think that there's a good point here that Magus was making, and this person replies to him, and this isn't a comment where I'm going to roast the person. I actually think the person's made a very good comment here, and I wanted to highlight it because I think they make a good point where they say, also dumb that Renegades basically goes to one event in Asia, smurfs through it, and steals a spot. Now, first and foremost, yes, I definitely agree that this highlights how unfair the tweak to the major is, where from the outside it doesn't seem like much has changed, because it hasn't really. The qualification is the same, it's just that now you get to the minor basically by making the qualifier. So I agree, the idea that Renegades don't have to ever even make it into the major itself in the traditional sense, but they constantly get to go to the major qualifier because they play in the Asia minor, whereas NIP has to come through a tough field actually sometimes just to qualify for the EU minor. Secondly, just to highlight how ridiculous Renegade smurfing and how having an easier group has gotten, path rather, through the minor has gotten them to the major qualifier so many times, let me point this out. So yes, people will know that Renegades, obviously the current version they have is probably the best version they've ever had of that lineup, has won the Asia minor this time. But a lot of people won't know this. That's the first Asia minor they've ever won. So not only were they smurfing, and not only were they in easily one of the crappiest minors, like remember, yes, the Asia minor I would say is actually still tougher than the CIS minor, but in theory, the CIS minor one day could have Na'Vi and Gambit and these top level teams like that, Flipside, could have all these squads in the CIS minor. So it is necessary to have a CIS minor. The difference is the best teams from the Asia minor are in the Asia minor every fucking time because they don't make it to the minor. To the major, they just always bomb the qualifier. So Tai Lu, Renegades, perhaps the Mongols at certain points in time, Flash Gaming. Now, here's the interesting thing. The Renegades team have actually come second in a whole bunch of the minors that they've had. So actually it shows how ridiculously boosted they've been by the major qualification system and how unfair kind of the balance of the different regions is in that particular respect. Just thought I'd put that as a secondary point people might not be aware of. So this was in a thread that was Pimp's tweet about the fact that everyone was complaining about SK or some shit like that, and you know, saying that they're the best. And this comment here, 594 points, so massively upvoted, and basically a consensus of people who were voting in that thread that they agree with this comment. And it says, as Machine said, it's not a rivalry unless FaZe starts beating SK. Now, Machine might have said that, but Machine does not actually, believe it or not, determine what the context and definition of the term rivalry is. Because if you ever go and look up what rivalry means, it means people who are rivals. They are contending with each other, competing with each other for the same goal, for the same ends. Therefore, they're jostling with each other to see who gets it. Now, the fact that one person gets it all the time doesn't mean that you're not rivals. You're still contending, you're still competing with each other. You're still the main people who are against each other. And finally, a key point I want to make in this regard is that the implication here is that because FaZe never beats SK, there is no rivalry. Well, I can tell you, the people in SK don't think, awesome, we have to play FaZe again. There are teams out there they'd much rather play than FaZe. When they play FaZe, they have some close games, they have some amazing back and forths, they have to pull out some amazing plays themselves. This is one of the sad things about these sorts of rivalries where one person wins a lot of the time. It's the same where Flash was beating Jaedong in 2010 in Brood War, or famously in a lot of the OSL and MSL type games where Boxer used to beat Yellow. People think, haha, see, it's not even a rivalry. One guy just wins all the big, really big, important games. That's the sad thing. You actually have to go to both of these guys in a historical context and get their take on their rival. Because what you tend to find out was the person who won most of the times, like Boxer, like Flash, they'll tell you like, holy fuck, you know what I had to go through? You know the level that they pushed me to be able to win all those times? And sometimes I had to come out with even more next time because they'd adapted and they'd learned and they'd studied what I'd done. They really appreciate, like, these guys are no fucking joke. It was very hard for me to win these matches because those were all-time great players. I mean, Rafa, in his reflections with me, the all-time great Quake player, was saying, like, you know, people used to tell me, like, oh, no, you've got the next match because it's against, you know, Avek or it's against Cypher. People used to beat a lot. And he would be like, no, I haven't. Those are really fucking hard games I'm going to have to win. It's far from certain that I'm going to win this tournament. Only a fan can really think that way, that it's not even really a rivalry. FaZe could come along and win the next 2 times against SK. Suddenly, we've got a really crazy back and forth, and suddenly now, FaZe has a streak, and is SK going to come back? History is not already set in place. A lot of the factors go towards SK, and they're certainly favoured in this matchup. But because FaZe is so good, the second best team in the world, it takes a lot from SK to win these matches. I mean, remember, SK themselves just lost to NiP recently. That doesn't mean somehow that unless SK can come and beat NiP again in a big series, oh, it's not a rivalry between NiP and SK. No, it doesn't work that way. So first of all, FaZe is winning titles, so immediately it's a rivalry between FaZe and SK. Secondly, they're both contending for the same thing, titles, number 1 spot, finals, positions, semi-finals, so they are rivals. And the fact that FaZe comes out on top of the rivalry makes it a one-sided rivalry. It doesn't mean not even a rivalry. Oh, no way are they contending for the same things. It doesn't work that way, guys. So 67 points, and it says, it was in a thread that was where Lurpus was saying that he was ready to say that the core of SK Gaming is the best lineup in CSGO history, basically, best core in CSGO history. And this guy with 67 points says, is it? None of them, oh, wait a second, I better just check the context of this. Right, so this guy was actually replying to a comment that had said, it is weird to think that a team with Olaf, Guardian, Nico and Rain isn't the best team in the world. And this guy replies, 67 points, is it? None of them are the best player in the world like Olaf used to be. Nico/Rain are good, but Cold and Fur are better. And Guardian is great, but not the best AWPer in the game, arguable. If you want to be the best in the world, there's no such thing as being second or worse than someone else, which FaZe is. I don't think it's crazy. Being second isn't bad at all. Now, obviously his latter sentences are absolutely on the money. Like, yes, you can't be the best in the world if you are the second or worse than someone else, just by definition. That's how best works. Now, the part where he says, I don't think it's crazy, being second isn't bad at all. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Being second is absolutely not bad. It's very, very good, actually. It's better than everyone else except first place. So yeah, but the first part, when he says that it's crazy that this team isn't the best in the world with those players. So what's weird about this is, first of all, he categorizes, like, he makes the whole argument about the notion that this team, the reason they're not the best in the world, his context is because none of them are the best in the world like Olofmeister used to be. That doesn't really make any sense, because actually there have been teams that were the best in the world that didn't have the best player. Like, I would actually argue that when Astralis was the best in the world earlier this year, Coldzera was probably still the best player in the world. In fact, other people after DreamHack Vegas said that it was Snacks who was the best player in the world, even though Astralis would then go on to win IM Katowice right afterwards and continue to assert their dominance as number 1 team in the world. So it doesn't really even follow that having the best player in the world makes you the best team in the world. That's not really the case at all. Sometimes you get it happen, like Get Right in NiP, or you get Shocks in Verity games, or you get Olofmeister in Fnatic, or you get Coldzera in SK Gaming, but even then, it doesn't make it clear cut, and that isn't the primary factor making you the best. It's one of the big factors, but you need a lot more than just the best player in the world to be the number one team and to be the top team. Now, in terms of the fact where he says, like, none of them are the best player in the world like Nico used to be, Olaf used to be, right? That's because Olaf is legitimately like one of the top 2 or 3 players to ever play CSGO. Not only a superstar player and a carry, but then massively dominant in terms of his impact on the game, and then the sheer amount of maps that he gave you an advantage on. I made a point about this in a snipe video, that he was helping them win the maps they weren't even that sick at anymore, like Overpass, like Cash at certain points in time. Then you go, and he says that it wasn't as sick as Olaf used to be, right? You could definitely make a case in 2017 that Nico is absolutely... has been either the best player or close to the best player like Olafmeister was, because it wasn't that Olaf was like the only player that were out there. There were players that were combating with him. He just had so much dominance and impact that he put himself a cut ahead, but not insanely ahead. Then he says Nico and Rain are good, right? First of all, the idea that they're just good. Like, I'd say yes, Rain is, because Rain's only come on really strong late in the year, and then he had a good period in the first FaZe lineup from time to time, especially on certain maps, obviously like Train. But the idea that Nico is good. No, Nico is absolutely transcendent, one of the 3 or 4 best players in this game. And if you had to buy stock in a player now, and on the basis of what they're going to do for the next 3 or 4 years, you would buy all the stock in Nico after the stock available for Coldzera is gone, because he would be the second best investment you could possibly have for return on investment that you could have. Now, the idea that Nico and Rain are good, but Cold and Fur are better, no. Fur is not better than Nico. That is a ludicrous statement. Like, that's not in any way the way it works. They set the team up to help Fur be able to do what he does. Like, when he does those aggro pushes, look at how he plays a lot of the sites. If he gets killed, it's not like he's just off nowhere and there's no one to help him or cover that spot or play in a certain way. No, the balance of his team, now yes, he's doing a lot for people like Coldzera opening up space, but the balance of how his team structures around his aggressive play absolutely is helping it be as effective. Now yes, he's absolutely amazing as well, and there are times, I actually think mainly further in the first half of the year, where I do think he was a top 5 player in the world and he was absolutely amazing. But better than Nico? No, definitely not. Nico has so many factors that make him better. He's so much more of a polished, complete, dominant player with much greater impact all around the game, not just in aggressive entrying as Fur has. Then, in fact, the notion that he says Guardian is great, but not the best AWPer in the game, arguably. I think you could make a very good case Guardian is the best AWPer in the game. I think it's between him and Kenny S. I don't really see any other AWPer as being close, quite frankly. Now, the way that he's great, but not the best AWPer, he's either the best AWPer or he's the second best. So again, if second's not bad, he's very, very good. So if Guardian, as we've already discussed, isn't even the best player in FaZe, and they've got Nico as their best player, and you're even saying Rain's good, and they've got Guardian, who might be the best or second best AWPer in the world, that already is a pretty crazy lineup. So you know what? To refer to the original guy who you're replying to, it is kind of crazy that a team with Nico and a very hot Rain and an amazing Guardian as an AWPer isn't actually the best team in the world. Then throw in Olafmeister, who's having really amazing maps on Mirage, who isn't in any way the best player in this team, but is on this team and is a team as well, a player that has massive name value. And it is kind of crazy that this team isn't the best in the world. Then add in that the guy also, the context of his comment clearly was, it's crazy to think that Olafmeister, player we think of as one of the best of all time, Nico, sick player for the last 2 years, Rain, very well-rounded player, guy who's been very strong on lesser teams, and Guardian, formerly best AWPer in the world, perhaps best AWPer of all time in CSGO. When you look at the name value, it's crazy they're not the best in the world. Yes, you can look at how they play now, and it makes sense they aren't. He's just making a passing comment, a pretty apt observation that most people would agree with. I think this guy's broken it down a little bit too unreasonably. So this was from the thread, which was a tweet from Felps saying that if he played the major, he would give it his all. And obviously he isn't indeed now going to be playing the major. And this comment with 59 points said, "This is Felps' one and only chance, probably in his lifetime, to win a major. Not to mention, SK look like they're on fire. So he should realise that as soon as possible and try to do everything they need him to." Right? I agree with all the second part. Like, SK's absolutely on fire. If he understands that this is a really big moment for him, a key chance, at least in the short term, that he's not probably going to get again for a while, then he should do everything they need him to do to give them a chance to win the major. Absolutely agree with that. And I made a whole point about this in a video, actually. I think that SK can win the major. I think they're the second favourite after FaZe. And you could even make a case, depending on what form they come in, because they've matched up well with Felps against past FaZe lineups, admittedly not this one, that they might even be the favourite. I could see someone making their own specialist case for that. But the problem I have with this is the first sentence where it says this is Felps' one and only chance probably in his lifetime to win a major. Right? First of all, in his lifetime, no, because he's already had one chance. He had PGL Krakow where his team came in as the favourite to win the major, not least because they'd beaten Astralis, they'd beaten FaZe a couple of times. Those were their main rivals. But because he got to the quarterfinals, only Astralis was in his way, and it turned out Device had a godlike series. Astralis played amazingly well. Obviously, they were in a black box because no one saw them at ESL1 Cologne, so no one knew how they'd been playing while they'd been studying teams like SK and FaZe. They managed to win out in unexpected fashion in a classic series. Otherwise, I think Felps would have a major already. I think SK would have won that major this year. So first of all, he's already had a chance. This is his second chance to win a major. Thirdly, the fact that you put probably in his lifetime, I mean, that's ridiculous. As I've said, the guy's already going to have had 2 chances in his lifetime to win a major. We've already got these very skilled players in the Villamix team. We've got Bolts, who's just come into SK now, Steel's off in Team Liquid. SK Gaming itself will probably need future players. Maybe one day Fur retires because of his hearing issues. Maybe one day, I mean, Coldzera's not exactly super young, 3 or 4 years. Maybe Coldzera has all the money, all the titles, and he says, you know what, I'm going to retire. That's exactly when I'm coming to get a player like Felps, because I think he is the number one talent outside of SK Gaming right now. I mean, in the context that he's not going to be a starting member and will probably be shifted off the lineup next year. So I think he is a fabulous player who, as long as Brazil doesn't completely die out in terms of chances, and as long as he, I guess unless he refuses to speak English, I think he has real chances to win a major and contend for a major in future teams, perhaps in this team again in the future. He's going to have a second chance right now. And on top of that, if he just goes ahead and learns English and puts more time and effort into socializing with people from other cultures, I think this guy could absolutely play in a Mousesports and Optic or a FaZe one day. So I don't think it is his only chance, even though I agree with the sentiment, he should try his best. So this was the thread where there was a tweet from Glaive where he'd said that he really believed that Astralis would have won Blast Pro Series if they'd had Device instead of Dennis. Now this comment here, 117 points, says, Jesus, that's savage and totally deserved, because he was replying to someone wrecking Glaive. Why Glaive got to be a cock to Dennis after the fact? Right, first of all, Glaive isn't being a cock to Dennis. I will say, Glaive is someone, as you might be able to guess, by the way, if you ever see him do interviews, who isn't a super social guy. He doesn't necessarily get all the social cues or all the tacts and aspects like that, because he's the sort of super smart guy who probably isn't neurotypical. That's why I think he has such a great mind for the game, and why he immerses himself, and why he can put in hours and hours studying demos and opposing teams and tactics and stuff. And hence, he probably doesn't articulate himself in a manner where he understands how other people will perceive what he says. He's trying to say as in an articulate a fashion as possible what he wants to say and his point, but he doesn't stop to think, how will other people take this comment? Obviously, something I can tell you earlier in my own life, I used to have an issue with before I stopped giving a fuck, basically. Now, the idea that he's being a cock to Dennis here, I think is really unfair to Glaive and ignores the context of why he's making this comment. He's making this comment to stand up for his star player Device, where people have just seen Astralis had a much better performance and chance to win a tournament than when they had Device recently. So he's trying to make the point that, no, actually, he thinks they would have outright done even better at this tournament with Device. He's trying to also make a subtext that he thinks Device is the best player and that he wants Device back in his team and that he wouldn't swap Dennis for Device, even though that was never really on the table, but obviously some fans were suggesting as much. And with Device off in a scenario where no one knows if he's coming back for the major, no one knows when he's coming back, no one knows if he'll come back as the same player, he's trying to also send the message out there to someone like Device that, yeah, we really need this guy, actually. It's not just cool that we can use stand-ins and come close to winning but not winning. We need our player back, because this is the time where perhaps we could have done amazingly and won a big tournament with him in the ranks. So let's look at the next comment, 36 points. Glaive isn't arguing that Dennis wasn't a phenomenal stand-in. He's just saying that they as a team would have performed better if they had played like they practiced and drilled and developed strats for. Exactly. Very reasonable comment. With a stand-in, it's a lot of luck of the draw. They had to just play 2 maps. They had to play very free form. They couldn't give him a lot of set tactical elements within what they wanted to do. They had to just hope he played well. And it turned out he played amazingly above and beyond what you'd expect. Then you have this comment, 155 points. But why? Just shut up and move on. First of all, utterly hypocritical. If this guy thinks that you should just shut up and move on, then why is he complaining about Glaive and about this guy commenting now? Just shut up and move on. Take your own advice, mate. Secondly, why is Glaive not allowed to make a public comment in support of Device and pointing out that he actually thinks the team could have done even better and that they're not kind of like just resting on the laurels of like, oh, we did super cool with the stand-in, so that's cool. No, he's trying to address community criticism. That's not in anything. Why does he have to shut up and move on? People just come up with their own stupid rules for other people's behavior. So this was a thread where Astralis played against SK Gaming and at Blast Pro Series, and the comment has 30 points, and it says, which goes to show you the point Valve tried to make with their rulings regarding coaches. I agree with them on their decision to not allow the add of a 6th player. CS is meant to be played 5v5, and it's a trade-off to have an incredible in-game leader who might lacklust on other areas, but then you have cases like Fallen where it really shows when he can do both, right? First of all, when he says that this was Valve's point when they tried to make their ruling regarding coaches, I don't know that it necessarily is. Valve have never submitted to proper interviews and proper kind of like discourse and discussion on this topic, so we'll never really know what their meanings were. They gave very vague comments in that post about the coaching change. Now, when he says CS is meant to be played 5v5, you got to break that down more. What do you mean it's meant to be? It wasn't invented as a 5v5 game. It was invented as a fucking pub game where you could have like 16 players on each team at times, and you had massive maps, and actually the main mode initially played was CS mode where you rescue your hostages. There wasn't even a DE mode where you blow up bombs, etc. At least that wasn't the main mode, and that definitely wasn't the main competitive mode because we didn't have competitive for the first year or so of the game. Then he says it's meant to be played 5v5. Now, 5v5 came about purely because American leagues like the CPL ran 5v5 and they had the biggest tournament, the World Championship, that had 50k for first place. Before that, Europe used to play 6v6. In fact, NA itself used to play 7v7 back in the Fire and the Hole days, and it wasn't the case at all that it was 5v5. That just happens to be an arbitrary number someone decided upon. No one ever even went into the details and the nuances. Oh, what will the dynamic be in 5v5 and how will it change the way the maps are played and what will it mean about utility usage and the tactical, but no one knew any of that stuff. Someone just decided 5v5 because NA used that. When he says it's a trade-off to have an incredible in-game leader who might lacklust on other areas, I agree in that respect. Yes, that's one thing about the current approach, is that if you want a really sick in-game leader, they're really going to have good fragging or be capable of good fragging. So you're saying, I'll have a sicker in-game leader, I'm going to have to trade off that he's not going to give as much frags, so either his tactics better be so good we win, or I better put more fragging elsewhere with monster fraggers. But that's actually a part no one stops to think about. If you were in a world, actually, where you had a coach who was the sick in-game leader and he doesn't have to frag because he's just calling the tactics, you wouldn't just load up the team with super fraggers, actually. So everyone thinks you would. Everyone thinks you'd make a FaZe. I actually don't think you would, because as you see with FaZe, that team actually lacks players who are very shrewd, veteran, all-around support type players and players who can do a lot of the really dirty jobs and don't have to have any kind of star power and don't have to use frags to win the game, can use positioning and team play and utility and reading the game to correctly cover someone's back. Now, I actually think if I had a superstar team like this, I wouldn't just take out my MSL character and put him as the coach and say, right, put in fucking Device there. No, I actually might go ahead and say, let's put in Zipnix to that team. Let's have even more structure. Let's have even more tactical elements, even more people who can run very precise things. And now when MSL coordinates that, fucking hell, this is going to be amazing what he can do, right? The idea that it would go one way or another as an extreme is a false dichotomy and straw man that Valve themselves and people who support Valve's decision set up. This idea it would just be mad fraggers and then a brain behind them. It wouldn't be. In fact, the best teams wouldn't be that. So, there would be some really great teams that were, and there would be some really great teams that were a totally different approach to the game, quite frankly. So this comment came after my tweet that said that Nip beating FaZe in a best-of-5 final, so it was IEM 12 Oakland, would be the biggest upset in CSGO history. And this guy says, 102 points, Nip winning this tournament might be the biggest upset, but beating FaZe just after SK certainly isn't. Now, I don't even understand what this comment means because he doesn't give us any context. He doesn't give us any reasons. All he says, essentially, is that because Nip's just beaten SK, that it's no longer a huge upset for them to win the tournament. Now, We don't know why that is. It's just because they've beaten SK. Somehow beating SK makes it not a big upset to beat FaZe in a best-of-5 final. Now, you know what's funny about that, by the way, is if you go back in time, SK was still ranked number 1 back at ESL New York. And do you remember what happened at ESL New York in the semi-finals? Team Liquid beat SK, and then in the final lost a best-of-5 to FaZe, this FaZe clan, 0-3. They got swept 3-0. Now, funnily enough, I think that would have been a huge upset if Team Liquid had won that one, but it's the same exact scenario. So by his logic, because Team Liquid beat SK, it should have been no surprise if it wouldn't have been the biggest upset if Team Liquid had beaten FaZe in the final. Same logic, right? Doesn't work at all. Now, the fact that NiP beat SK, big upsets happen. And part of the reason their upset happened was they had a very unexpected game on Overpass. They had amazing reads on Inferno, and they exploited Inferno after gambling on it themselves when they weren't even that good a team on Inferno. They took a big gamble letting that be the third map instead of something like Cobblestone. So the fact that NiP beat SK doesn't mean, right, well, if they can beat SK, they can beat FaZe. No, that doesn't follow at all, actually. Hence why FaZe can beat everyone, including teams that can beat SK, but can't beat SK at the moment. The factors of the matchup are why NiP was able to beat SK, along with actually an overperformance by Rez and by elements of their team, and then an underperformance on Overpass from SK. So none of those factors suggest that NiP's more likely to now be able to beat FaZe. Are they in good form? Are they in hot form of the tournament? Sure, but hot form is the most overrated quality ever. It's why I think momentum is a bullshit concept beyond something that motivates players individually in their mind alone psychologically, because hot form goes like this: you're hot until the second you're not. So what happens is you might be hot in the group stage, you might win the group, you might be hot in the semi-finals, you might get to the final, you might just get rinsed out. Wait a minute, that happened to Team Liquid at ESL 1 New York, didn't it? They were in really hot form, everything was going great, they got to the final, and what do you know on map 1? Not hot at all. Man's not hot. Team Liquid's not hot. Horse ain't hot. Doesn't need a fan in his stable, does he? Now, in this scenario, another reason why it was a massive upset if NiP could have beat FaZe, which they did, is because they would have to do it, yes, by exploiting maps as they did that FaZe aren't that good on, like Train, possibly Cash. Now, here's the funny thing. Train's all right for NiP, but it's nothing spectacular. They're not the best team in the world at it, but in any shape or form. And Cash wasn't even that good a map for NiP at this point in time. Traditionally it had been, but they'd been on a losing streak. Actually, FaZe had been able to take care of it. So adding into the mix that NiP had next to no chance on Inferno Overpass against FaZe, unless they could pull out a miracle like they did against SK on Overpass, odds were that FaZe was going to win this best-of-5 series. And FaZe's amazing individual fragging meant that they even had shots on all of NiP's maps. So basically, FaZe had a chance to win on 4 of the 5 maps, and you only need 3 wins to get the win. Whereas actually, NIP, realistically, only had a chance to win on 3 of the 5 maps, and they had to win all 3, and they did. And even then, still getting double digits for the guys from FaZe. Meanwhile, on FaZe's maps, NiP's getting smashed, not even getting to double digits. So no, it was a massive upset, one of the biggest ever, to win in a best of 5. Best of 5 is super hard. That's why actually, I think the fact that FaZe has had to face SK in a bunch of best of 5s this year makes it even rougher. Because in a best of 3, what would happen is, they would win Inferno, let's say SK wins Overpass. Okay, decider, let's say it's Mirage, right? If it's Mirage, there's absolutely a world in which FaZe can win 1 game of Mirage, as they did against Blast Pro Series, by the way, and we're close to doing here at this tournament, EPL Season 6. There's absolutely a chance they can do that. So best of 5 makes it even tougher to win, because you've got to win 3 out of 5 maps against a team that's much better than you. And at the time, you don't have a basis historically to say that you'll be able to win this particular series. FaZe is a much better team than you. So it doesn't really work that way, actually. So this is from a thread that was about Na'Vi being last place in Pro League, but still having like a pretty good plus minus, especially for a team that low down, because they'd gotten tons of rounds even in the games they'd lost. So this top comment with 69 points just says how competitive the scene is when teams everyone consider crap, like LDLC, Godsent, Heroic, Big, Envy, are still in the top of EU and doing pretty well. Damn, LDLC though, they are pretty high for what it's worth. And then this guy replies, to counter that, For me, 73 points, for me it just shows that maybe best of one online CS is not the best way to determine how good teams are and should not be used. So I agree with his point there. I actually don't think it's that shows how competitive the scene is, that LDLC, Godsent, Big and Envy, by the way, all bad teams, not a single team there who deserves to be in the top 10 in the world, and none of them are particularly close right now. The idea that all of those teams were doing decently, at least in the top part of EPL, actually does say, there must be something about this format or the medium of being it online that's allowing these to happen, which is kind of what the guy's saying. Maybe best of one online CS is not the best way to determine how good the teams are. I agree with this guy's point. Here's the reply, and it was actually a reply from the first guy who made the comment with the 69 points. He has 71 points. He says, that's an excuse. That's 22 best of ones you've seen. That's more than enough to judge teams. Except that best of ones typically aren't the best. Even offline, the top teams lose way more best of ones than they do best of threes. Even in the scenarios where you play a massive tournament where you have like Swiss system, you still get the best teams that will dominate the rest of the tournament, losing a best of one every now and then. It's quite rare actually that the best team 3-0 a Swiss system. So the guy's point was that online CS, beyond just best of ones, like best of ones are bad anyway, but best of ones, as I point out in my video, have problems, but coupled with online CS, where ping and the fact people are at home and it's not as serious a match, and you don't have to play as many games in a day, and you might just play two particular games against someone, that's the EPL format. All these factors make it more likely that you get upsets. So now it's very likely you can have upsets, there's high variance. Actually, playing more of those games, as counterintuitive as it seems, can provide more upsets. And therefore, this guy's, it's 22 best of ones. That's more than enough to judge teams. Judge them on online play. The point is there's not really any connection to offline play. So this was where FNS made a comment on Twitter about the NA, the Americas minor rather, having bad PCs. And this guy says 251 points. The minor isn't even run by ELeague, because FNS's tweet was like, the PCs are bad, like sort this out for next time at ELeague. Now, when this guy, the minor isn't even run by ELeague, right? First of all, the minor is run by ELeague in as much as they delegate the responsibility for who runs the minor. So ultimately, ELeague is ultimately responsible for who they chose to run the minor and whether or not the minor had good enough PCs. Telling the person who just runs the minor, change your PCs, well, they might not even have the minor next time. It doesn't work that way in the major cycle. Telling ELeague to change it, who the buck stops with, is actually the most logical thing. Secondly, it's not up to FNS to know who ran the minor and to know who the exact company is or to know who the person is who set up the PC badly and say, please change it for next time. No, he can just tell the person in charge of the major and therefore the minor by within that context, the PCs aren't good enough. If you're going to run a minor, make sure, or delegate responsibility for someone who runs a minor, make sure the PCs are good enough. That's absolutely reasonable. The idea 251 people are like, that's just stupid. The minor isn't even run by ELeague. Just absolute bonkers nonsense, isn't it? So this was in a thread about Coldzera commenting how Virtus.pro impressed him a lot in the Epicenter final. And this comment with 150 points says, when everyone calls you the GOAT, the greatest of all time, CSGO player, and you still practice 13 hours a day, unbelievable mentality on this guy. I would agree, because first of all, there are some very great players. If you made like a list of the top 10 players ever in CSGO, half the list doesn't practice anywhere close to as much or as consistently as Coldzera does. So actually, yes, that is something about him that is amazing. And that's why you can never look at money or just winning trophies as the ultimate motivation for people on his level. Because people like that, it doesn't matter that you win a major, that you get paid an amazing salary, that you've already made a lot of money, that you could chill out and still be 90% as good and not practice as much. People like Coldzera are searching for greatness. They are trying to achieve mastery. They're trying to get as good as they possibly can get at a game. And that often means trying to get better, even on a daily basis. They know that it's not about just having a sudden rise in form 3 months from now. You can make that happen to some degree if you take care of every little detail day to day now and improve 0.01% today and maybe 0.05% tomorrow. That's what will put you in a position to be even better, even more consistent, have even fewer weaknesses, emphasize your strengths even more, and therefore not just be good, not be great, not be the best, but be the best you can be. Not just to be the best player in the world, be the best player you can be. And that's a key thing about Coldzera, about Michael Jordan, about Kobe Bryant, about Peyton Manning, about these truly great players, Tom Brady, these all-time great players, about why they're not just good, they're consistently good, why they don't just win, they win again and again, and why every season they seem to come back and show a different type of excellence, the same drive to be excellent though, and it never seems to fade. That is something that does make these guys very special. So this is from a thread where they were mentioning like the the graffitis on the wall. And this guy with 107 points says, can you imagine playing one of the most competitive games ever made and putting your heart into it and seeing a fucking part of the map dedicated to you? Like, how insane would that feel, lol? And then this guy just replies, 85 points, and this is not a critique, it's just banter. He says, you tell us, what is the story behind the infamous gay spot? Gay spot. Now, that's obviously not PC. Obviously, in a world where there was consequences for who these people were and they weren't just anonymous people on the internet, yeah, that might be considered like bad form or rude or whatever. But let's face it, first of all, it's funny as fuck. And secondly, it's just straight banter, isn't it? Like, he's not really being mean to that guy. He's just using him for the old, well, you set me up for that one. Like, it's just banter, isn't it? It's fucking solid as shit. So this was from a thread that was in which people eventually started discussing ELeague. And what's funny is this comment here with 18 points just shows how people can just be so far off the money. So this guy says, talking about ELeague, remember, being on TBS, which is its typical slot was 10 p.m., I think, Eastern. Yes, it was in Atlanta, 10 p.m. Eastern on TBS, which, by the way, is like the number one basic cable channel in America. And this guy says, 18 points, Friday night at 10 is pretty prime on it, especially on TBS. No, it is literally the opposite of prime and on TBS. The whole reason, and even the president of Turner said this, as to why they had ELeague on and in that slot, is because that is the graveyard death slot, where everyone in your demographic is out drinking or is out partying or is out doing something else because it's Friday night and it's right smack bang in the middle of their Friday night where they're going to be having fun. No one's watching TV, and therefore you don't want to put any good shows on there because you'll waste it. They won't get good viewers. It's in no sense prime time for that viewing slot. And so actually, it is the opposite of what this guy says. And that is why they actually love ELeague, because it's very cheap to produce in contrast to most shows. And there is a dedicated audience to it who's different from your normal TV audience who aren't going to be around watching this or might be out drinking in bars. And that's exactly why they do this for TBS and why they run ELeague. So funny enough, this guy is actually almost as wrong as you can possibly get about ELeague. Right, this comment was in a thread where it was about FNS saying that, for the record, because he obviously made the joke about KNG, like he has no idea if they actually were partying before that match and it was just a joke. Now this guy with 166 points makes what I think is a really shrewd point, a very interesting one about the culture of Brazilians and why they make these death threats. And so he says, Brazilian here, it is a cultural thing, referring to KNG saying, prove it or I'll kill you. He says, Brazilian here, it is a cultural thing, but not the death threats per se. My opinion is that we don't give the same weight as other cultures to expressions like, you're gonna die, I'm gonna kill you, etc. They've become normal around here. Just think of MMA. When there's a Brazilian fighter, the crowd will usually chant, vai mora, which literally translates to, you're gonna die. Although I can clearly understand why people consider it a threat, most of the time it is intended to show strength, to intimidate the other person. It shouldn't be ignored though. This is an example of a very bad cultural behavior that we need to improve upon. Now, what's good about this here is he does a really good job of outlining like the cultural context and how it's typically used and, you know, like basically kind of like what it would mean for other people. It's just shit talking. It's just trying to intimidate someone, trying to show strength to yourself. Like, you know, we'll destroy you. It's kind of like that, but they're just saying something that to us, even though I'll kill you is kind of like I'll destroy you. If you say I kill you, it means it's something very different in Europe or North America than saying I'll destroy you. You know, that's one of them's understood culturally as being trash talk, and perhaps in Brazil this is the case. And then he also makes a really, I think, reasonable point at the end that just because it's culturally understood in Brazil doesn't mean they should be going and saying it to people who aren't from Brazil and won't know the context. And certainly it's not a very good cultural behavior. Now, personally, I'm in favour of freedom of speech. It's not the end of the world. It's just that, unfortunately, freedom of speech is always going to be tricky to take apart components of, well, what's a death threat? Is that freedom of speech? And if this looks like a death threat and we don't know it is, it probably is something that they would do a good job in Brazil from improving upon and trying to eliminate if they want to then talk to the rest of the world and communicate to the rest of the world without being misunderstood. That's the key point here. It's not that they should do it to be good people or whatever. I wouldn't make a judgment like that, but I think you should do it if you want to be understood better, because at the moment we're not understanding what you're saying, most of us from Europe and North America, and we are thinking you're making a legit death threat. So if you're not, probably a good idea to go ahead and alter it so that you're communicating with us, so you're getting the message across to us. So this is from when Pronax stepped down and Dennis was added to Godsent. And this guy with 80 points, so most people agreed with him, said, owner of the team. Unexpected. Now, this is after Richard had already published that video in which he showed that like Refresh Entertainment owned most of these teams, the majority of the teams, or that the teams were owned, the majority of the stocks, the shares rather, by people who weren't the actual players in the team. And that if the players owned anything, it was a very small percent, which as a result wasn't legally required. So something like 1 to 3% that wasn't required to be shown on this public database where you can go and see who owns these companies in Denmark. So actually, in no sense is Pronax the owner of the team. Now, is he some sort of a managing owner where he has power even though he owns a very small percent, if he indeed owns any at all? That's possible, but we don't know that. We have no information on that. So the idea this guy's like, Pronax is the owner of the team, it's unexpected he would be removed. Well, he isn't the owner of the team, is he? And therefore it's not unexpected. He was a terrible player and he was doing really badly in terms of tactics and coordinating the team and terrible in terms of results. So actually it's not very unexpected, especially if you indeed know that he does not own the team or seemingly any controlling interest in the team. Right, this is from someone explaining that like most of the top 10 teams didn't make it to the major playoffs because obviously the Swiss system actually eliminated so many of them, like G2 and FaZe, obviously. There was a whole bunch of teams that never made it through into the playoffs. So this guy says 132 points. It's almost like these rankings don't actually show who's the best. Now, this is an example, I think it's called Poe's Law, where when you're on the internet and people say things that are like really stupid, it actually becomes almost impossible sometimes to tell if what they're doing is satire and parody or whether they actually mean that. And it's either a really shrewd, clever person making fun of that or it's a stupid person just saying that straight up. So when he says it's almost like these rankings don't actually show who's best, my suspicion is he means that he thinks rankings are all bullshit and that they actually just don't show anything because they don't show who the best team is. Now, they definitely do, in as much as they show who the best is in placings, accomplishments, and metrics that we can judge over a certain span. So in my case, 3 months for my rankings. I think HLTV.org's maybe run 12, but they have some sort of decay on the results. So they do show who's the best, but over a certain span and under that criteria. Again, it's the same as when you say, it's like if I said, this ruler doesn't really show me anything because it doesn't show me how hot this cup is. No, because a ruler can only show you the distance of a cup measured in the metric and the scale of the ruler. You always have to take the tool and the context of the tool and put that within the context of what it then shows about the object that you're using it, the metric or the tool to measure. Yeah, it won't show you the temperature. You're going to need like a thermometer for that or something else. Maybe some sort of a camera that can detect visual heat signatures. Yeah, it's not going to show you everything. Now, maybe he was saying it as an actual straight up point, as I would say, which is that rankings don't show who the best is right now. They don't show who the best team necessarily would be in a match. Like the third best team won't necessarily beat the fifth best team if the third best team was SK Gaming earlier this year and the fifth best team was G2 because G2 repeatedly beat SK and had a matchup advantage. So if he means they don't show who the best is right this moment, well, they don't, because rankings show over a set period of time, and with all other factors, they don't show who today is the hottest or the number one or the best equipped team to win a tournament now or yesterday. No, they don't show that, and they can't, because that's not what rankings ever were designed for. And by the way, anyone who thinks that rankings don't show anything or don't in any way vaguely gauge the best, go and look at rankings over the years, and they are a much better predictor long term for results and who will be on top than just saying who looks very good in a match now or just using random metrics of like what a fan's opinion is. So this was from a thread where Lurpus had said something along the lines of that he was showing how the Swiss system without reseeding was flawed, because if you had all the games play out with the favourite winning, you actually still couldn't have ended up with the top 8 teams in the world in the playoffs. Therefore, there's a flaw in the system, right? Because the best teams all winning still wouldn't have gotten them through. It would actually have gotten like the 9th best team through or something, some weird little quirk like that. Now, this guy with 77 points says, I don't understand why we even have group stages if people are just going to complain no matter what if a top team gets knocked out. Just invite your idea of the top 8 teams and play the playoffs. This is a great example of a really ignorant, stupid comment that hasn't even understood Lopez's point. He's making a point about an abstract concept of the perfect tournament bracket, and if every team played to the maximum of their ability, that there is a flaw in the system. He's not talking about these teams right now or getting salty that a top team went out. This guy says, I don't understand why we have group stages. So okay, we have to either, in this guy's world, accept flawed group stage systems and not tweak them to be better, or we have to get rid of group stages entirely. Those are the only 2 choices. We can't make something better. We have to accept it totally broken, or get rid of it entirely. Now that seems to me like a very unreasonable fix. Lopus is trying to lead us in a direction where we can actually have group stages, but improve the format. There'll still be upsets, but generally if teams play to the maximum of their ability, the right teams will go through and will have very good playoffs, because guess what? We want really good playoff brackets, don't we? When he says the part of like, if a top team, now, when they do that, by the way, fans are implying like it's not a top team if it goes out. If you're implying that FaZe wasn't a top team at PGL Krakow, and therefore when they went out it's not a big deal, you don't know anything about Counter-Strike. They were absolutely the second best team in the world. You could actually make a case that they were one of the big favourites to win that major. They'd been incredible. They'd never failed to make the semis with Nico. They'd been in three straight finals, I think it was. Was it 4 straight? I think, let me see. Katowice, Star Series, ECS, ESL Club. Yeah, 3 straight finals. So no, the idea that they weren't a top team, again, this is where fans have their own tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. They're like, that you guys just said this guy was a top team, but when he didn't go out, that proves he wasn't. Doesn't work that way. That's called variance, son. And there's a reason why FaZe overall had amazing results and didn't at one time. It's not because they were somehow exposed as having been fake at all those other tournaments they made the final and semi-finals of, beating world-class teams. This is from the thread where Nitro had complained that he'd done the window jump and a smoke had blocked him, so he hadn't made the jump. Now this guy, 139 points, says, well, that's how the game works. Just got unlucky. Okay, so with every other dynamic and interaction of game physics that we don't like, and that maybe even is a bug, if anyone ever complains, just say, well, that's how the game works, just got unlucky. So if someone says, I was matched up for a matchmaking game, and even though I had a whole bunch of people who are LEM on my team, everyone else on the opposing team were globals, rather than say, well, you've made an interesting complaint there, let's explore what the problems might be or what solutions I see. No, well, that's how the game works, just got unlucky. So when Big was able to do that jump over that box and see over the box, even though the opponents couldn't see them in their heads and know that they were jumping over, rather than say, this has a problem, is this an issue, should we have it fixed, should we contact Valve, just say, nope, well, that's how the game works, just got unlucky. This is actually the opposite of an interesting or a meaningful or valuable in contribution to a discussion. It is fucking nothing. It's just saying something happened. It happened. If you don't like it, so what? That's just absolute garbage, isn't it? It's not the fact that he got blocked by the smoke raises questions of, oh, well, that's unfortunate, isn't it? Maybe that shouldn't exist in the game, or should it exist in the game? Let's have a discussion about that. What would the impact have been if he hadn't have been blocked by the smoke? Would he have won the round? Would he have had a key different altered position on the map that might have let him get a kill that might have led to winning the round? If they'd have won that round, would it have changed the outcome of the match? No, maybe it wouldn't. Okay, well, still an interesting point about whether that interaction between a smoke grenade and a model should happen, as it didn't in past versions like Counter-Strike 1.6. No, instead, well, that's how the game works, just got unlucky. The opposite, basically an anti-comment, because this is like the antimatter equivalent of a comment, because when it meets a real comment, it just blows up the whole conversation, makes it absolutely fucking worthless. This is from a thread where someone complained about Superstitum's videos. He's the guy who makes like the meme/frag movies of like Scream and Olaf Meister and all kinds of plays, Simple. And I think he actually made the Simple Undertaker series, right? And 131 points. This guy says to a comment where someone had linked an image of someone had complained about Superstitum, and he'd basically replied on YouTube like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just have to wipe my tears with all these $100 bills or with money or something. Now, first of all, when he says that, it's obviously a joke. It's facetious, right? What he's implying is like, oh, well, don't care what you think. And he's maybe even being a bit bawdy and a bit trash talky by being like, I'm making money anyway, so don't care that you don't like it. I'll just wipe my tears with the money I'm making. Then this guy here, 131 comments, because it became a massive hate train, that thread, by the way, says, shows what kind of person there's behind his videos, lol. Does it? Does an offhand joke that he made show what kind of person he is? Is that to be read as though it's not in any way just a joke? It's a pure comment. He literally doesn't care, and he is only going to wipe his tears with money, and therefore he only cares about money. He's just like, he's got the sickness of the mark of the beast upon him in end times. He just worships mammon and greed and money, and therefore we can tell a lot about what kind of person he is, right? Like, you know what? If his grandma says like, oh, son, I'm having a hard time getting money together to get the bus to go to the local area where I have to have my doctor's appointment. Does he go, don't give a fuck, grandma. I've got so much fucking money. I'll just wipe my tears when you die or have a horrible time and fall over and break your hip because I've got so much money. This comment that I made on YouTube completely reveals my entire character. You can really see what kind of person I am. Can't you? Fuck you, grandma. No, it doesn't really reasonably, does it? Like, if someone comes to Superstitum's door, knock, knock, knock. Hi, we're collecting money for cancer charity to try and get a cure. Does he go, fuck fuck you. I don't care about that. I keep my money. I wipe my tears with it, motherfucker. I wouldn't give money to you. This is the sort of person I am. Do you see my YouTube comment? You'd have known that I'm not the sort of person who gives to charity. Jog on, fucker. You're not getting anything. No, what a ludicrous comment. This guy's not even saying this is a facetious joke. He actually means it. That's the worst part. This was from a thread where Tarek was talking about how bad the viewership was for, I think it was EPL, where it was on YouTube, obviously, instead of Twitch. And this guy with 33 points says, LMAO, people in the comments saying Twitch doesn't have YouTube money. Twitch is owned by Amazon. What's the point? Because the implication we're to take from your comment here is that Twitch now has access to Amazon's money. That's not true whatsoever. Twitch is owned by Amazon. That doesn't mean that Twitch then has access to all of Amazon's money or power. They get a budget from Amazon. And guess what? Amazon's a very wealthy country. It's making a lot of revenue and profit. And the reason they're doing that is being very shrewd with where they put that money and where they use their resources. So they're not just giving all their money and saying, oh, what? YouTube's offered 10 million. Fuck it. Offer 30 million because Amazon's got billions. No, that's such a naive way of understanding the way the business world works. It suggests to me this guy has no concept whatsoever of how businesses work, especially big business. He doesn't know anything. He thinks that you just have loads of money and go, lol, can do whatever I want, loads of money. That's a fast way to end up not with loads of money. And hence, companies that have lots of money but have also consistently made lots of money and now have among the most money are the least likely to waste money and cost inefficient investments like this. And in fact, that's why actually Twitch probably doesn't beat out YouTube's offer. They don't think it's worth the money in this case, even though they may indeed have some money. Now, how much money they have, none of us know. We have no clue how much they have. And pointing against Amazon makes no sense whatsoever. That's like saying, oh, well, I mean, this river ultimately comes out of the ocean and the ocean has billions of cubic liters of water. Therefore, you know, there could be billions of cubic liters of water in this river. Well, no, that's not necessarily the case at all, is it? Because it's just an offshoot of the ocean, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it has all of it or even access to most of it. Probably has not much of it at all, right? So you can't really make that kind of analysis at all. So this was from a thread where someone started commenting on Nico having left Mousesports. And this guy says, honestly, 137 points. Since Nico left, I feel like whole of Mousesports have become a better team. And now, with the addition of Rops, they are just becoming better and better. They don't have to work around a single player anymore, and they can try being an actual team now. Now, the best part is, of course, Nico and Oscar played 2 tournaments together. So Oscar in Mousesports, you can't really count that as being typical of Nico's period in Mousesports. Well, without Oscar, there was no other superstar player in Mousesports. There was Nico, who was a godlike player, and the second best player was actually probably Chris J for most of the time, and at times could have been Nex. Now, the idea that like you can't build the game around a single player anymore, right? Which of those 2 players, Nex and Chris J, would you like me to build Mousesports around? Because whichever you pick, it's going to make the team much worse than building it around Nico. Nico's your only chance. He's the biggest gun in the world, and therefore you've got to harness that gun and direct it as much as you can towards your enemies and hope that that takes care of things. Now, the idea that they can now try being an actual team, they tried that when he had got B before, and then they tried it when Nico was the in-game leader, and then they tried it when they brought in Lowell and he had a little burst of fragging, and they tried it with Chris J becoming more of a dominant AWPer in ELeague Season 2. All these things didn't make them better. Actually, they were much worse during those periods than when it was just esports carrying the fuck out of the team. They didn't have the good results of, for example, making top 4 at ELeague, which was fantastic. Instead, they had much more lackluster results. In fact, funnily enough, when they tried to be a real team with Nico, they had their 10-game losing streak on LAN. So the idea that you can look at current Mousesports, which is what people have done all the time, and say, look at all these good players, Sonny, Rops. I mean, this is before Sonny had joined, but Rops, and then at the time they still had Lowell, etc. All these players weren't there and weren't playing in this fashion, and Oscar wasn't there. You had no option. It's a disingenuous comparison between lineups that actually aren't the lineups that you're now characterizing. So this was from a thread that was about where the guy said, like, does anyone else miss all chat in matchmaking? And this guy, 328 points, says, cheeky banter is just a code word for obnoxious teenagers screaming at each other and such. Right? Can we just stop, pause a second, and consider the context of what Counter-Strike and what video games are, right? Because he's saying it's just code word for obnoxious teenagers screaming at each other. That's kind of what the game's for. That's who the game is for. That's who plays the game. That's how they enjoy the game. That is the experience of playing multiplayer games. Trash talk and banter is part of it. It is a fucking video game for letting off steam and having a little bit of fun. Why would you want to come home from work or come home from school and have some other cunt who's acting like your boss or your teacher all up your arse about your behaviour in this video game you're now playing for fun or to let off steam, as in talk a bit of shit, play a little bit, say whatever you want? Like, imagine getting fucking called into some office based on your play. Jenkins! You know how we feel about your attitude here at the Verizon Wireless family. That is not our company policy and values for you to be having cheeky banter on the internet in video games when you're not at work. When you're not at work, you are still at work and you're representing the Verizon Wireless family, and you better buck your fucking ideas up, because I'll send you to that behavior review board with HR. Quick lickety split, son. Come on, it's a fucking video game. Calm the fuck down, will you? If you can't handle that cheeky banter, you sound like you're kind of an obnoxious person trying to ruin other people's fun and their pastime and their free time.
Yo, this is Aluf. You got pretty big balls to watch Thorin's YouTube videos.